Mr. Louis Chua.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I would like to first declare my interest as an equity research analyst in a financial institution covering the real estate industry. Madam Deputy Speaker, the adequacy of HDB housing for singles has arisen in public and parliamentary discussions ever so often, showing this remains an important and evolving issue in Singapore. Over the years, public housing options for singles have gradually expanded ever since the introduction of the Single Singapore Citizen Scheme in 1991. However, since the scheme's inception almost 30 years ago, one key policy requirement has remained unchanged, that singles must be at least 35 years old to be eligible to purchase public housing. At the same time, recent headlines reporting record high HDB resale prices suggest that something is amiss in public housing provision even for couples. As set out in the Workers' Party manifesto and as reiterated by LO Mr. Pritam Singh in the MND COS debates earlier this year, we believe this threshold can and should be lowered, and we propose to lower the BTO eligibility age for singles to 28 years, which is when most Singaporeans would have been in the workforce for a few years and have begun to lead more independent lives. This proposal would be a critical change, yet a continuation of the government's efforts over the years to expand HDB options for singles while still allowing HDB to give priority to providing for families. In fact, we believe lowering the threshold for owning HDB flats to 28 years would go a long way towards HDB's stated aims for Singapore's public housing to be inclusive and to reflect the diversity of our society. The objective of today's adjournment motion is twofold: to ensure that the housing needs of not just singles, but that of all Singaporeans are met. Before I move on to state my case on why singles should be allowed to apply for a BTO flat at an earlier age, I would like to touch on the most pressing issue in my view, and that is housing supply. I would like to implore the government to take urgent and decisive steps to increase the availability of public housing and to address the current demand-supply imbalance to ensure that the housing demand of all Singaporeans, not just singles, can be met. In response to my adjournment motion last year on supporting diverse aspirations through rental housing, SMS Sim Ann shared that home ownership has been and will continue to be our key housing strategy for Singapore. Since this is the government's position, I hope that the government can take steps to deliver on this strategy. I acknowledge that compared to last year, housing supply is set to increase by about 35% over the next 2 years, at about 23,000 BTO flats per year in 2022 and 2023. Moreover, the HDB stated that it is prepared to launch up to 100,000 flats in total from 2021 to 2025, if needed, subject to prevailing demand. These numbers, however, need to be put in context. Even if the HDB decides to launch the whole 100,000 flats in total from 2021 to 2025, this implies that BTO supply falls 20% to about 18,400 in 2024 and 2025. Moreover, while the average of 20,000 BTO flats between 2021 to 2025 is an increase compared to the average of 17,000 flats between 2016 to 2020, this is still 13% below the average of 23,000 flats in 2011 to 2015, during the time when Mr. Khaw Boon Wan was MND Minister and sought to address the backlog in HDB flats. We have already seen BTO application rates climb steadily over the past decade to new highs. For 3-room and larger flats, this increased from 2.8 times in 2012 to 6.1 times in 2021. Similarly, for 2-room flexi flats whose buyers are more likely to be the elderly or singles, these saw application rates too rise, albeit at a more moderate pace from 2.8 times in 2012 to 3.6 times in 2021. What is of greater concern is that despite the supposed ramp-up in supply this year, application rates have reached new record highs, suggesting that the level of demand-supply imbalance remain a critical concern. Following the February, May and August BTO exercises this year, application rates for 2-room flexi flats and 3-room and larger flats have increased even further and reached new record highs at 5.1 times and 7.2 times respectively this year. This is worrying, especially when we look at the recent August BTO exercise, where the overall application rates are seeing no signs of letting up, with that for 2-room flexi flats at 5.5 times and that for 3-room and larger flats at 8.3 times. While I acknowledge that our proposal on singles BTO eligibility could increase marginal demand for 2-room flexi flats, it does not detract from the fact that there appears to be serious imbalances in the housing market, the spillover effects of which is evident for all to see in the secondary market, where HDB resale prices have increased by 25% in the last 3 years, with prices today 12% higher compared to just 1 year ago, and prices showing no signs of slowing down, increasing by 2.8% in just the last 3 months alone. So I hope the government will seriously prioritise its resources to support Singaporeans in achieving their home ownership aspirations. Moving on to reducing the BTO eligibility age to 28 for singles. By the age of 28, the average Singaporean male and female would have finished their tertiary education and had some time in the workforce. In that sense, they would have some chance to lead independent lives and steady their financial footing. As shared by L.O. Pritam Singh earlier this year, in the NYC's 2021 publication on the state of youths in Singapore, when it comes to aspirations or life goals, the top choice selected by our youths was to maintain strong family relationships, while the second choice was to have a place of my own. Our proposal looks at reducing the BTO eligibility age to 28 and not that for the resale market. While opening the resale HDB market to singles below 35 is a possibility worth exploring, we think it is important to first enable singles to access the BTO market to ensure that incremental demand is met through new supply and not through existing supply via the current buoyant HDB resale market. Moreover, with a waiting time of up to 5.7 years as of the August 2022 BTO launch, assuming one is successful in balloting for a flat on the first attempt at the age of 28, he or she would already be close to 35 years old by the time the flat is in a move-in condition. No different from purchasing a resale HDB flat anyway. Affordability is also a key consideration when it comes to meeting singles' housing needs. Now, while first-timers can access various financial support grants from the age of 21 to aid in the purchase of a flat, this is at this point not available to singles. That said, I recognize that single buyers too have access to housing grants and can buy smaller BTO units in non-mature estates. Should the eligibility age be reduced, I believe singles can avail themselves of such grants too, thus supporting of singles' home affordability. If the government has budgetary concerns or believe that younger singles should not be incentivized to buy a place of their own, the level of housing grants accorded can be on a graduated scale, where grants provided for 28-year-olds are at a discount to the full enhanced CPF housing grants, with an annual step up to the current eligible age of 35. Yet singles aged below 35 who wish to have a place of their own today would have to either purchase a private residential property, which needless to say is significantly more expensive than public housing, or rent a flat in the open market. However, even in the HDB rental market, many singles would be priced out of the market if they wish to rent a place of their own. Median rents for 3-room HDB flats are currently about $2,000 a month, which is essentially the entire take-home salary of a polytechnic graduate today. The purchase of a BTO 2-room flexi flat, on the other hand, are a lot more affordable. Based on indicative prices of close to $100,000 for a 2-room flexi flat in non-mature towns in the latest August BTO launch, the monthly repayment amount over a 25-year period is only about $400, a fraction of what it costs to rent in the open market. So while it is abundantly clear that many Singaporeans who may be single for various reasons before the age of 35 would like to have a place of their own, many simply cannot afford to do so. Should we not look into further enabling single Singaporeans to meet their housing needs and aspirations? Madam Deputy Speaker, when we look back at the time before the introduction of the Single Singapore Citizen Scheme, the original rationale for excluding singles from owning HDB flats was to prioritise BTOs for families as the use of space in land-scarce Singapore was not optimised, and secondly, that home ownership by singles was supposedly inconsistent with government social policy of encouraging marriage and preserving the traditional family unit. The change in policy came about in 1991 by allowing singles over 35 to buy HDB resale flats, but limited to 3-room flats in selected locations. The rules were further relaxed over the years, but the next big break came in 2013 when singles over 35 were for the first time allowed to buy new, subsidized 2-room flats directly from the government. Madam Deputy Speaker, the introduction of the Single Singapore Citizen Scheme and the developments that followed showed that the government can be responsive to the changing demographics of society. In fact, Minister for National Development, Mr. Desmond Lee, recently reassured Singaporeans that the government cares about housing for singles when he said at the Singapore Economic Policy Forum on 29th of October 2021, Some Singaporeans remain single for a variety of reasons, including obligation to family and parents, or a matter of choice, or a matter of life course, but many still want or need their own living space. They may wonder if we care about their housing needs. To these Singaporeans, let me assure you, we do. We recognize your needs, your aspirations, and your sacrifices. That's why we have in fact been expanding housing options and grants for singles over the years. However, 30 years on from the introduction of the Single Singapore Citizen Scheme, singles below 35 remains largely precluded from owning their own HDB flat. While there have recently been welcome exceptions carved out for certain special situations, such as for single parents, the general threshold of excluding singles below 35 years of age seems to have been retained by default since 1991, despite changing demographics and societal mindsets. This rule has serious implications on the growing number of singles under 35, depriving them of the security of home ownership if they are priced out of the private market, the private and HDB rental market, and not having a place of their own and build their own lives. More importantly, current policy signals to single Singaporeans that their marital status, whether by choice or due to factors beyond their control, is somehow viewed as undesirable and undeserving of government support for home ownership. Madam Deputy Speaker, implicit in the HDB exclusion of singles under 35 is expectation that Singaporeans should get married before turning 35 years old, and that up until that point, single Singaporeans will live with their parents. While this traditional life progression might have been more relevant back in 1991, we know now that Singaporeans are staying single longer for myriad reasons and not necessarily moving straight from their parents' home into a matrimonial home. Contrary to popular belief that the younger generation are eschewing marriage, surveys have shown that single Singaporeans still want to get married. In fact, over the last 20 years, the general marriage rate for resident males and females have been consistent at 43.3 for males and 40.2 for females. The latest data point on general marriage rates in 2021 is even higher on a year-on-year basis for both males and females at 45.3 and 44.2 respectively. What has changed is that Singaporeans are staying single for longer and getting married later in life. Based on data from Singstat, the proportion of singles among citizens in the 30 to 34 age group is now at a record high of 42% in 2021, increasing steadily from 27.6% in 2000 and 36.9% in 2010. A 2013 survey conducted by the IPS shed some light on why Singaporeans are getting married later in life. The IPS found that among respondents who wanted to get married, the key reasons for their getting married later in life than their ideal age were the delayed acquisition of the markers of adulthood and not having a suitable partner. At the same time, data shows that more young people are moving out of their parents' home even before marriage. DOS data showed that between 2017 to 2020, the number of persons aged below 35 years old and living alone has almost doubled from 12,300 to 25,000. There are, of course, those who are neither living with their parents nor living alone, but there are also a considerable number who, while still living with their families, do not have the financial ability to live on their own as much as they desire to do so. While it can be argued that some singles might have needed to move out given work-from-home requirements during the pandemic, many others have expressed a yearning simply to lead more independent lives in their early adulthood. The data and trends highlight the negative effects of excluding those under the age of 35 from owning HDB flats, and considering these developments, it behooves the government to revisit the issue and assess the validity of the main arguments against HDB ownership by singles under 35. Madam Deputy Speaker, one of the key arguments for limiting singles' ability to buy HDB flats relates to the allocation of resources, that in land-scarce Singapore, flats should be prioritised for families over singles. To this point, I am comforted by PM Lee's comments during the National Day rally earlier this year, where he shared that, and I quote, "We have done our studies and planning. We will have enough space for future generations. Our problem is not finding the space to build enough flats, nor keeping homes affordable for Singaporeans. We know how to do that." Putting the issue of land scarcity aside, I would like to make 3 points on the issue. First, data from past BTO exercises show clearly singles do not compete with young couples and families for the same type of flats in non-mature estates. The data shows that young married couples overwhelmingly apply for 3-room or larger BTO flats and very few apply for 2-room flats, whereas singles are limited to buying only 2-room flexi BTO flats. For example, in the BTO exercises since 2015, the application rate for 2-room flexi flats among first-timers have consistently been less than 1 times, while that for 3-room or larger BTO flats have consistently been multiple times oversubscribed. Moreover, first-time singles can only apply for 2-room flexi flats in non-mature locations, with a cap of 65% of the balance 60% of such flats meant for non-elderly applicants. In other words, at most 39% of such flats. This shows that even without making any adjustments to the unit mix of various types of flats, lowering the minimum age threshold for singles to buy a BTO flat from 35 to 28 is expected to have a minimal impact on young couples' likelihood of securing a flat. Secondly, we are in full agreement that public housing policies should provide extra support and incentives to young couples and budding families. Having said that, providing support for young couples and families should not be viewed as mutually exclusive from expanding HDB options for singles. For instance, the government can loosen the BTO eligibility criteria for singles without in any way impinging on the subsidies and other benefits given to young couples, which may even be enhanced. Thirdly, even if there were to be a question on the allocation of limited resources, such an exercise will always be a balancing act conducted in accordance with government priorities and, more importantly, guided by fundamental principles and values. Our current policy measures have been described as imposing anti-single penalties, and which unknowingly become signals to singles that their marital status, whether by their own volition or not, is viewed as undesirable and undeserving of government support for home ownership. The next key argument against singles owning HDB flats is that it's somehow in conflict with the government goals of encouraging marriage and family formation. If this hypothesis were true, then we might see an immediate dip in marriage rates for singles over 35 years old who have been able to buy an HDB flat of their own. To test this, we looked at the number of marriages in the 35 to 39-year-old age group at 2 key points in time when HDB options for singles were expanded. After October 1991, when the Singapore Citizen Scheme was first introduced, and after July 2013, when singles were allowed to buy 2-room BTO flats in non-mature estates. The data showed that in the 3-year period from 1992 to 1994, as well as from 2014 to 2016, marriage rates and the number of marriages for both males and females in the 35 to 39-year age group went up instead of falling. We accept that this could be a simple coincidence of timing between housing policy and marriage rates, which are of course affected by multiple factors and do not necessarily imply causation. However, the data does suggest that we need not be too circumspect about expanding HDB options for singles as a factor that will single-handedly cause a further delay or decline in marriages. On the contrary, allowing singles to have a home of their own might even encourage marriage and family formation. Madam Deputy Speaker, this adjournment motion does not call for a major overhaul of the policies that are in place today. I hope we can firstly take urgent and decisive steps to increase the availability of public housing and address the current demand-supply imbalance. And secondly, lower singles eligibility age for HDB BTO flats from the current 35 years to 28 years of age. I'm comforted that there is a slight reallocation of 2-room flexi BTO flats in non-mature areas for singles, with up to 65% of the non-senior 2-room flexi flats in non-mature estates set aside for first-timer singles, an increase from up to 50% currently. This, however, only means a marginal increase of at most 9% of 2-room flexi flats in only non-mature estates available. As elected members of Parliament, we are given a mandate from and by the people we serve. We therefore must lend a listening ear to the generation ahead of us and ensure that our public housing policies are both inclusive and reflective of the diversity of our society. SMS CMN shared last year that beyond just a roof over our heads, home ownership has provided Singaporeans with a sense of stability, security, and belonging, and has given us a strong stake in our country's progress. In this spirit, I hope the government can consider the points I have raised in this speech and ensure that the housing needs of singles and all Singaporeans are met. Thank you.
Minister of State, Mr. Tan Kit Hao.
Madam Deputy Speaker, firstly, let me thank Mr. Louis Chua for raising his perspectives on this issue. And I'd like to assure Singaporeans that ensuring affordable and accessible housing for Singaporeans has always been an important priority for this government. Today, almost 9 in 10 of Singaporeans own a flat, one of the highest ownership rates in the world. At the same time, we are keenly aware that housing preferences and aspirations change over time and across different life stages of families and individuals. And therefore, MND and HDB have been actively engaging Singaporeans to understand their needs and aspirations, as also reflected in Mr. Chua's theme for the adjournment motion, Housing Needs for Singaporeans. And we've been listening to Singaporeans, hearing their views and taking their suggestions. Most recently, as part of the year-long long-term planning review, or LTPR, we have heard from over 15,000 people from all walks of life who shared with us their housing aspirations and needs. Seniors shared with us that they would like to age in place in a neighborhood that they are familiar with. Working adults shared with us that they would like to have workplaces closer to home to minimize commute and to have flexibility to reconfigure the flats to provide more space as more of them work from home. Couples with young children told us that they would like to live near family so that grandchildren can be taken care by their grandparents. And young couples wanting to get married and settle down shared with us their anxieties of getting a flat at an affordable price, especially in the bullish property market. And singles, especially those older singles, shared with us they would like to get a place of their own near their aging parents so they can better care for their elderly parents. And younger singles and younger Singaporeans also shared with us that they value their own personal space and would like to stay by themselves, even if it's rental for a temporary basis. Many of them still wish to own their homes eventually. And we hear these views, aspirations, and needs, and we take them seriously, and many of them fit into the inputs for the long-term plan review, which was recently launched and exhibited at the URA Centre. And we received many valuable feedback and suggestions, some of which are quite similar to what Mr. Chua raised today. And we are studying those suggestions carefully, and we are engaging Singaporeans as part of the Forward Singapore exercise. We would want to meet the needs of all Singaporeans. We want to meet the needs of all Singaporeans, their aspirations and their wants, if we can. But we have limited land and resources and would have to prioritize and locate within these constraints. So I thank Mr. Chua for recognizing these constraints and recognizing the very difficult stresses and strains the government have to deal with to accommodate Singaporeans' needs for housing, their aspirations, and their wants. And that's why we need to prioritize our housing, public housing for those who have more urgent housing needs. For example, implementing income eligibility criteria, even for married couples, as well as for singles. I'd like to address a couple of points that Mr. Chua has raised. So I'd like to assure Singaporeans that even as we engage all of you as part of the Forward Singapore exercise, we have already taken steps to address the concerns raised by various demographic groups and various segments of Singaporeans. And we are closely monitoring the situation if other measures are needed. Firstly, on young couples, which Mr. Chua talked about, and I'm glad Mr. Chua has recognized the many moves and steps that we've taken in terms of giving first-timer couples priority, including in this recent August BTO launch, as well as stepping up and enhancing the various grants and support that we give to first-time couples. We are also taking steps to raise the housing supply. And I'm glad Mr. Chua also recognized that we are working hard, working with the construction industry that have been severely impacted because of COVID-19 pandemic to ramp up supply, up to 100,000 flats, up to 2025, if demand and circumstances warrant. And Mr. Chua spoke about the demand for BTOs, and I'd like to share with Mr. Chua that we monitor this situation very carefully. Although the application numbers have risen and increasing, but 4 in 10 of the applicants did not choose a flat when invited to do so. So we are monitoring the situation, both the supply, the interest, application rates, and those locations where those application rates are elevated. In terms of affordability, I'd like to assure Singaporeans that this is an important consideration for HDB and the government. In fact, we look at the statistics very carefully. Most first-timers only need to use less than a quarter of their monthly income to pay for their loan installments. In fact, most of them can service their housing loans using their monthly CPF contributions with little or no cash outlays. I'd like to address a second group of people that Mr. Chua spoke about. He talked about singles and the need to cater for their needs, aspirations, and their wants. And I'm glad Mr. Chua has also recognized that over the years, the government has been trying to accommodate and support their needs. More recently, we have also made the changes under the allocation quota. As in 2013, we opened access for singles to purchase new two-room flats under HDB, under Singapore with the new Singapore Citizen scheme in 2013. And we have also raised the quota for two-room flats in 2015 from 30% to 50% of the non-senior quota in the non-mature estates. And we still see a fairly strong broad-based increase in housing demand across all groups, including singles, which Mr. Chua spoke about. And we have so increased the quotas to better support all first-timers, including singles. Especially, we raised the non-senior quota from 50% to 65% with effect from the August 2022 BTO exercise and moving forward. And eligible first-time singles can also qualify for various housing grants up to $40,000 for new flat purchase and $80,000 for resale flat purchase. So we have taken steps to adjust, to fine-tune our policies, trying to meet the needs, aspirations of all Singaporeans within the constraints of the land and resources that we have. There's also another trend that we've observed, where more singles, youth, and young couples are renting. And there's a vibrant rental market out there with a wide variety of both public and private options. Some of those are provided by seniors or families who are renting out their rooms or flats to supplement their income and retirement adequacy. An increasingly popular housing trends, especially among the youths, is in the form of co-living or shared housing arrangements with common facilities. These spaces are attractive as they provide the flexibility for shorter-term rental contracts. Some even provide housekeeping services and fully furnished rooms. And we see many commercial providers stepping up with innovative offerings that cater to the diverse range of needs for singles and youth. I think that this shows that the market is functioning and responding agilely to consumer demand and preferences. This is an important part of the entire housing market. It's not just public housing, but also private housing, but also commercial providers with rental options. So we'll continue to review developments holistically and comprehensively and assess if there will be ways to work with these private actors to meet the demand from youths and singles that Mr. Chua spoke about.
MOS, you have a minute and a half.
And to Mr. Chua's point about lowering the age eligibility from 35 years old today to 28 years old for the housing market for singles. This is something that we've discussed before, we are looking at, and certainly many Singaporeans have also suggested these ideas of lowering the age limit eligibility criteria as part of our long-term plan review conversations, and we'll certainly engage those as part of our Forward Singapore discussions. But there are considerations that still remain, that there are binding constraints in terms of land and resources, as well as the implications on the housing market with enhanced demand. Bearing in mind that supply is inelastic, while demand can change very quickly, and that might lead to higher prices, and those at the margins may be squeezed out, especially those vulnerable singles, like the elderly or those single parents or those in need of housing urgently. So these are considerations that we will bear in mind. In conclusion, let me sum up by just thanking Mr. Chua for recognizing many of the moves and efforts that we have made as government to accommodate the needs of Singaporeans, their aspirations and wants. And this is certainly something that we will continue to work towards as part of the Forward Singapore exercise. We will engage Singaporeans on their housing needs and aspirations and discuss how we can each play our part to build an inclusive home for our families and loved ones. Singaporeans' housing needs will become more diverse as our society becomes more diverse. And housing is so much a core part of our families, of society, and our social compact between the government and our citizens, between each of us in society, and across generations. So Minister Desmond Lee will be launching our Forward Singapore engagements later this month, and we hope that everyone will participate actively, giving us your ideas, suggestions, and co-develop these solutions together, but importantly, co-create solutions that bring Singapore together and bring Singapore forward, balancing the needs for various groups of people for housing and aspirations. Thank you.
Order. The time allowed for the proceedings has expired. I adjourn the House pursuant to standing order. Order. Order.